and welcome to Scale Car Garage. Well, we're over here at the workbench I use for soldering. We're going to try and get that chassis for the Cheetah running, make it a running chassis. So then it'll be ready to accept the body and interior. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's make sure we get the chassis running first. So why don't we get started on that right now on Scale Car Garage. First, let's assemble the brass plate and tube that will be the holder for the guide blade on our chassis. I punched a hole in the plate for the brass tube that fits the post of the guide blade and allows it to pivot. Then, I filed the now assembled guide holder in preparation to solder it to the chassis. Using a file ensures a true, clean surface. I remembered to also file the rails of the chassis in the area where the guide holder will be soldered to it. I applied flux to the rails of the chassis and aligned the guide holder, ensuring that the post was in the center line of the chassis. 2 lengths of solder were cut and placed along the inside of the rails of the chassis. Using a torch, I proceeded to solder the guide holder to the chassis. Allowed to cool, the chassis was then wiped clean of any residual flux. Next, it was time to solder the brackets that will hold the body of the Cheetah to the chassis. The brackets are squares of brass sheet cut to be 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter in size, and then prepped to be soldered alongside the motor on each side of the chassis. The chassis rails were cleaned and had flux applied to them. The outboard ends of the brackets were placed on remnant square tubing, which are the same height as the chassis rails. This ensures that the brackets will be perpendicular to the chassis. I cut 2 lengths of solder and, using a torch, I soldered the brackets to the chassis. Next, using square styrene stock, it was time to fabricate the body posts that will connect the chassis to the body. I did a test fit before the posts were cemented to the body to ensure that my measurements were correct. Then, using styrene solvent, I glued the body posts to the body of the Cheetah. I did a test fit of the chassis to the body to ensure that my placement of the body posts were correct. Once the body posts had cured, using a pencil, I marked where the edges of the body posts met the mounting brackets on the chassis. Using these marks, I determined the location of the hole to be drilled in the mounting brackets. Using a drill press, I then proceeded to drill the holes and test fit the chassis to the body to make sure all was well. The next step was to trim the excess brass from the guide blade holder using a Dremel tool. Here's the chassis so far, placed on a setup block to test fit the body and check the stance of the car. So far, so good. Using the clear insulation from some speaker wire, I connected the shaft of the motor to the drive shaft and pinion gear, which is passed through the drive shaft carrier, and ensured that a proper mesh with the crown gear that rotates the rear axle was achieved. The wheels were secured to the front and rear axles, and oil was placed on the front motor bearing, the rear motor bearing, the drive shaft carrier bearing, pinion gear, and rear axle holders. I rotated the rear axle by hand to get the moving parts lubricated, then applied power to the motor to ensure that all was working well. Last step was to solder lead wires to the motor, which are then connected to the brushes in the guide shoe, which power the car around the track. Okay, so what we have done is assembled our brass chassis. As you can see, I put some tires on. They're 40 Shore urethane tires on the rear and the fronts. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how this goes around the track without a body on it. And it's going to be really light. It'll eventually need some weight and so forth, but let's just see if this can go around the track like so. All right, fingers crossed. Hey, 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 here we go. Woo-hoo-hoo. Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's going. Well, what I'm really encouraged with is the fact that it sounds so smooth. Wow. It burns rubber too. It's gonna be just like a Cheetah. Phew. I'm really pleased. So anyway, I hope you're pleased too. Now, just hopefully one more step. I've said that before, but I'm really pleased with the way this chassis turned out. Listen, thanks so much for your encouragement. Anyway, onward and upward. See you soon. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe.